My name is Tuğba Çolpan. I'm the Chief Commercial Officer at Enquire AI. I'm glad to be moderating today's discussion during this volatile period in the Middle East. Today's session is hosted by Enquire AI. For those who may not be very familiar with our work, we are a conversational insights platform bringing together expert intelligence, structured data, and AI synthesis to help clients navigate complex markets. And given the discussion today, it couldn't be more relevant and timely. We are honored to welcome Dr. Vali Nasr, who is one of the world's foremost voices in geopolitics and U.S. Middle East policy. Currently, Dr. Nasr is a senior fellow at the Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies, where he was previously dean. In the past, he advised multiple U.S. presidents, including President Obama, who appointed him as senior advisor to the U.S. Special Representative for Afghanistan and Pakistan. He also advises global financial institutions. His scholarship explores regional politics and global power shifts. And as most of you are aware, his latest book is called Iran's Grand Strategy. Given the ongoing conflict between Israel and Iran, we are really fortunate to have Dr. Nasr to share his thoughts on possible ramifications. The format of this discussion is we will spend about 35 to 40 minutes with Dr. Nasr, and then we'll open up the really to all of you. You can ask your questions through the Q&A section on Zoom. And for those who are joining us through replay, if there are other questions you would like to ask our team, just reach out to the Enquire team and we'll make sure to get back to you with our insights. And with that, Dr. Nasr, it's really a privilege to have you. It's my first day, actually my first week at Enquire, and it's really a privilege to be speaking with you. So I'm super excited. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you. First of all, welcome aboard.
Thank you.
It's very good to have you. And let me start by thanking Cenk and Enquire for inviting me here. I've been involved with Enquire since its inception, and it's wonderful to see it thrive and to be part of this. So, this is actually an interesting event, largely because it fits also very much in the bailiwick of the kind of contribution that Enquire does. Now, the contours of this conflict in some ways have always been there. That, this conflict between Iran and Israel, Iran and the United States has been brewing for some time. It goes a while back, but we've had an assumption of largely stability in this relationship, even though it was antagonistic. Periodically, there was be sniping, sanctions pressure was rising on Iran over the decades. But there was not an expectation that there would be a sudden break in this. And it's one of those sets of events that, in a way, started slowly and then it began to accelerate. So and I would give it as a background that Iran and Israel have become more and more antagonistic, and it goes back to the time of the revolution. And this conflict between them has become more intense. If you think that in recent years, the Arab world basically has left the picture from the Arab-Israeli conflict. I mean, either countries like Jordan or Egypt imported militaries on Israel's borders, signed a peace treaty with Israel, or that other very large Arab countries like Iraq and Syria, each for a different reason, ceased to be players. The Gulf countries are not on the borders of Israel, have never been in a position to threaten Israel militarily with land armies, etc. So in a way, Israel's periphery no longer face a threat to its borders. And what threat it faces from non-state actors like Hezbollah and Hamas, which Israel blames on Iran. So in a way, over the past 2 decades, Iran has become the sole, if you would, regional threat to Israel. And actually Israel views it, and particularly after October 7th, it viewed it as the one country that keeps the Palestinian issue in a kind of a boiler that Israel cannot solve it as it saw possible. So this relationship became more and more intense. Iran, for its part, has for a long time been locked into a policy of resisting, confronting, pushing back against the United States and Israel, seeing Israel as America's principal ally in the Middle East, that is the one with the greatest capability. And so they have been building their capabilities against one another. And when October 7th happened, in a way, it pushed this conflict much more into the fore, because the attack on Israel, both the way it happened, that it caught Israel off guard, that it shocked the country, that it horrified the country with the kind of violence that it perpetrated on kibbutzes, etc., in southern Israel, largely, I think, resolved Israel, that that the stalemate, the ongoing sort of negative stability with Iran, that nothing major would happen, was no longer tolerable. Now, in the first year of the conflict, Israel was actually looked like Iran and its allies, the axis of resistance, had the upper hand. That for all practical purposes, Israel was fighting on all fronts. It was not able to restore its deterrence. It was losing its international reputation with the war in Gaza. And then Israeli population still felt insecure because of Hezbollah rockets, etc. That Israel was actually not achieving superiority vis-a-vis the axis of resistance. And the break came with the intelligence technology coup that Israel carried out with the pager attacks that then led to assassination of leader of Hezbollah, Hassan Nasrallah, and the killing of Hamas leader Ismail Haniyeh in Tehran. And then for the first time, these two countries actually exchanged fire directly with missiles and bombs across each other's borders. And after the second of these, Israel also believed that it had significantly damaged Iran's air defense systems. Meanwhile, with the death of Nasrallah in Lebanon, and then Iran losing its position in Syria, Iran's ability to put pressure on Israel, on Israel's borders, was no longer there. So it's true that we always Israel refers to Hamas and Hezbollah as terrorist aggressors, but in a completely military strategic sense, their value to Iran was that Israel would not carry out the kind of attack that is doing against Iran today when those forces were on its borders. So when those forces are not on its borders, then it felt much greater freedom to actually take the fight to Iran. And Israel's position since then has been that this is an opportunity to go after Iran. It's not actually a good idea to give Iran time to regroup and rebuild itself and grasp its breath, if you would. And as a result, what we're seeing is really Israel. It's not so much that Israel didn't believe that the nuclear deal would be good enough, or Iran is close to a bomb, etc. I think those are the immediate reasons for the war. But I think the larger reason is that what if the nuclear deal had been successful, right? I mean, that's the reason it's not acceptable to Israel is not because of the nuclear issue side of it. It's also because it would stabilize Iran's situation with the West at a time where Israel's belief is actually you have to go for Iran's jugular. You have to destroy the state while you have the opportunity. And it did that, essentially started this war as we see it. Now, I mean, particularly with the kind of work you do, there's a lot of sort of assumptions that are flowing out there, that the regime is about to fall, that America is going to enter into this war, and that Israel is actually basically in command of Iran's skies and has the run-off show. A lot of this is true, but perhaps it's not as deterministic as it might seem. For instance, Israel has not achieved its goal of destroying Iran's nuclear program, at least in the way that it itself has defined what destroying Iran's nuclear program means. Particularly destroying the deeply embedded facility in a mountain southwest of Tehran, which is several 100 feet underground, a Fordo facility. And Israel cannot do that from the air without American B-2 bombers and bunker buster bombs. So it can keep hitting Iranian targets, and it can keep that tempo going. But in reality, it's not going to be able to do that without America's participation. So long as America is not in the war, it's not achieving the nuclear side of its agenda. Secondly, it assassinated very early on in the first 24 hours Iran's Revolutionary Guard commanders, literally the head of all of the forces. And that did not actually take away Iran's ability to fight a war, because they started this barrage of missiles against Israel literally the next day. And so far, the regime has not fallen. The state has not collapsed. There's a lot of rumors about it happening, but to me right now, this is still more hope than fact. It's not really, it's not there. And I would say the longer the war goes, the more unclear the path will become, because I think Israel is well positioned for a blitzkrieg attack that has to give result very quickly. The longer the war goes, the more difficult it is. And I don't mean impossible, but it more basically, it becomes much like Russia or Ukraine. The question of size of a country, depth of a country, etc., becomes more important. We have to take into consideration, Iran is an enormous country in terms of geographical size. It's 92 million people. Israel is about 10 million people. Israel has a lot more technological capability, but ultimately this is not finite. For instance, rumor has it that Israel is already having difficulty with interceptors that it needs for its Iron Dome. For every Iranian missile, it has to dispense with a lot of tracers and shots to bring it down. The Economist had a cost estimate that the war is about $300 million a day, right? And a longer war that would obviously pile up, or that already Israel's main refinery in Haifa is out of commission because of a missile hit. And actually, the Iranian missiles have been getting through and hitting targets beyond what was expected. And every time this happens, it disrupts business in Israel. So, the Ben Gurion airport has been shut for a while. People are continuously going to shelters. It works in terms of the fact that Israel is extremely efficient with protecting its population because they go to shelters and they're very organized. But that does not protect the economy, because they're not going to work, they're not working. And then you have to add to it that Israel is already still in Gaza. It's actually expanding its ground footprint, still has to deal with what the end game in Gaza is. Now, that doesn't mean that Iran does not have faced the same sets of things. Israeli missiles and aerial bombs are destroying refineries, electricity grids. It's also causing havoc, like this continuously saying that the city of Tehran, city of 10 million, it's a little bit smaller than Istanbul, for instance, for you. I mean, it's like giving a decree on air by President Trump, by Minister of Defense of Israel, that you have to evacuate Tehran. So it's like saying you have to evacuate Istanbul. What does it mean, right? And a lot of people, and then there are buildings that are hit, so people do get scared. So it does impact business. It's designed to cause chaos that would overwhelm the government. That's the reason for it. And Iran also does not have an infinite number of missiles. I mean, maybe Israel doesn't know how many they have. Maybe there are estimates. You don't know what quality they might still have. So, neither side is going to come out of this war sort of with a quick victory. But I think the longer the war goes, the less the Israeli advantage will be. I mean, element of surprise, element of being able to hit hard. But so it's like a boxer that if you don't knock him out the first round and you have to go for a long bout, then things might change. Now, if the United States enters the war, then a lot of things will change. Then it comes down to what damage does the US do right at the beginning? How extensive its bombing will be. One nuclear site, or will it be a much more extensive bombing? Or other sites, even killing the supreme leader, which they claim they can do, but who knows? And then the ball is in Iran's court. How does it react? If it's one bomb on one side, I could see that they may decide not to react right away. But if it's extensive, I don't. The current Iranian regime will just accept surrender. So there might be a counterattack. I mean, hitting U.S. bases, mining the Straits of Hormuz, which can put it out of commission for weeks if they mine the Straits of Hormuz. And the target could, for a while, expand. And then the ball is in President Trump's court. After an Iranian response, what do you do next? And that could be a pathway actually to America having to engage in a kind of war that it doesn't want to do. And Iran is much larger than Iraq. It's not a flat country. From the nearest port facility to Tehran is 2 mountain ranges and 2,000 miles. So so for the United States to decide that it's going to take that first step, it needs a lot of assumptions and acceptance of certain risks. Assumptions are the regime would fall, it would surrender, it would be nice and clean and easy, right? The risks are that none of these things prove true. That the Iranians will respond, the regime will not fall, it will not be nice and easy. You might not even be sure that you destroyed the nuclear facilities. And then you're in a situation that would force the United States to move further. Now, the impact broadly, there are risk factors there too, because it can bloody the Gulf one way or the other. Whether Iran retaliates against the Gulf, or you enter a period in which either chaos in Iran or a more radical situation, Iran puts pressure on Gulf's economies. I mean, you can have $1 billion data center in the Gulf, and a $10,000 drone coming from Iran can destroy it, right? So the risk factor goes up. And then the question is, like, what might a prolonged risk to global oil markets mean? Iran's ability to keep disrupting or attacking shipping, even if there's no government in Tehran. If you have something like the Houthis, so in a way, the risk cost for energy will go up. And then the third factor is that the consequences of a war with Iran might be that the United States would need to sit and babysit Iran for a prolonged period of time. Like, if you looked at the headlines the past 2 weeks, Gaza, China, everything is fallen by the wayside. The president had to leave the G7 to deal with Iran. He doesn't want to admit it. He criticized President Macron for saying it, but that's probably the reason he did it. He's had 2 retreats at Camp David about Iran, right? So it can consume the White House for a period of time. Now, then you can look at all the other issues you're covering around the world and say, what does that mean if the United States becomes much more entangled with Iran? How intensely will it be negotiating with China? How intensely would the Chinese take an American posture seriously if it's busy with Iran? What would it do to Ukraine, Russia, for instance? And so there are consequences beyond this. Now, this is kind of like a dominoes. The dominoes can fall in the right way, or the dominoes can fall in the wrong way, or you may not be able to predict it. So right now, those who are advocating war are talking about a very nice and neat scenario, which to me, it sounds a lot like Iraq 2002 to 2003. Everything's going to work out really well. The regime's not going to do anything. We don't need to do anything beyond aerial bombing. And then there's going to be a popular uprising in Iran to throw out the Islamic Republic, which I don't see it, actually, to be honest with you. Not in the way that it's being portrayed in Washington. Largely because I think the Iranian public right now is not eager or willing to join into an American-Israeli project that doesn't have a clear path of how it would make their lives better, allow them to go back to their homes, stop the war, make things better. Secondly, they're also very nationalistic, and they are they're not welcoming foreign invasion. They may not like the regime, but there's a war being waged on the country, and they're not going to side with the invaders, especially when they're feeling terrorized by fear of bombs and being told to evacuate your city. I mean, the very idea I want to put on the table, because people in the West don't realize, when you tell them you have to evacuate your city, yes, it can sound compassionate that we want you to get out. But then you're basically telling them we're going to level your city. That's what they're hearing. And then, Iranians have also watched what's happened in Gaza. So to them, the counterpoint is that, basically they're telling us to leave so they can destroy Tehran. Now, so that for a population does not make them, feeling warm and fuzzy towards those who are threatening them, right? They don't see them as friends anymore, or as liberators, or at least a large number of people who did before no longer do. And then the idea that there's going to be a nice and straightforward regime change, again, is making a lot of assumptions about that. You always go from black to white, as if there are not many shades of gray in between, some of which might be more positive and some of which might be more negative. So if I were to say, I mean, there might still be a diplomatic off-ramp. I mean, there's this meeting that's going to happen in Geneva between European foreign ministers and Iran's foreign minister. There is, I'm sure, a lot of back-channel diplomacy that European countries are doing. There might be a sliver of a diplomatic off-ramp, but for that to happen, much like it's the conversation about whether there could be ceasefire or peace talks in Ukraine and Russia, both sides have to be thinking of war as more costly and indeterminate than any kind of negotiations with all three of them, meaning Iran, Israel, and the United States. I would say perhaps Iran and the United States are closer to that point. I don't want to even say they're there, that they might want to avoid the next step. I'm not sure Israel is there yet. That it would be willing to say, okay, I don't think this war going forward from here on is as the cost benefit analysis is not what I thought. I'm open to hearing an alternative. I don't believe Israel is there. Iran and the US deny it, although both of them have suggested willingness to talk much more than the Israelis have. So I don't want to say we are there. And perhaps when the President Trump said, I'm going to give it 2 more weeks, although you can never trust what he means by 2 weeks. And I'm sure the Iranians don't, because this war started while diplomatic negotiations between US and Iran were ongoing. But I think what he's suggesting is that maybe in 2 weeks' time, both Iran and Israel will be readier, right? So I'm not going to take action now. The longer this goes, the more recalculation both sides are going to do, and so the calculation would change. Let me stop here. I mean, I know we can pull on a lot of these threads, but that's sort of where I see the state of play being.
Thank you so much for these remarks. Really appreciate it. It's very insightful. Well, I will just remind our participants, if you have any questions, on your screen, you see the Q&A section. You can definitely place your questions. I already see some questions, but for those who are just maybe dive in later, feel free to use that. I'll start with a few questions.
Sure, please.
To get more. Okay. The first one is actually more about your book. You talk in the book about strategic culture. How do you see the current conflict in terms of the arc of the current regime, the threats, the age of the supreme leader, the loss of their forward defense proxies in the region relative to past episodes on stubbornness in Iran's modern past, and previous recent unwillingness to negotiate away enrichment.
Right. So, the current Islamic Republic that we are seeing is really the product of about 4 decades of a kind of a strategic outlook that particularly this supreme leader is responsible for or is associated with them. And it came out of the Iran-Iraq war that Iran would only really, the most important thing for Iran, for its nationalism, is to protect its independence against neighbors who invaded it like Iraq, against Israel, but most importantly against the United States. And basically, Iran defied national independence, development, its achievements, what the Islamic Republic wanted to do, all in terms of it's necessary and possible by not engaging the West. In fact, despite the West, that America means ill toward Iran. That historically, going back to previous periods, it has interfered in Iran, it has changed regimes in Iran, and that ultimately the Islamic Republic is all about protecting Iran's independence from the United States. Now, this kind of a basic philosophy, which I think, and I argue in my book, is much more important than Islamic ideology, which we constantly talk about, is basically then has led them down a particular path, which is a continuous escalating confrontation with the US. In other words, they attack US, the US puts sanctions and organizes Arab countries against Iran. Then Iran tries to push the US out of the region by attacking it, things like that. Then the US reacts. Then the same happens with Israel. And so you have a situation where Iran at no point over the past 4 decades has taken an off-ramp of saying, this strategy doesn't work, let's do something else. There have been debates. I mean, when Iran's former presidents, for those who are familiar, Rafsanjani, Khatami, Rouhani, even people like his foreign minister, Zarif, Araghchi, etc., the whole purpose of negotiating nuclear deal in the mind of these people was to basically say, we need to de-escalate with the West. This strategy is not working. It's not getting us anywhere. It's just increasing the tensions. But the supreme leader kept believing that in the end, Iran will triumph from this escalation of tension, that ultimately the United States will get tired and leave them alone and leave the Middle East. And maybe they took the wrong lesson from the fact that they did well in in the US war on Iraq. The US came in thinking it's going to be easy, they're going to invade Iran next. And the Iranians basically situation in Iraq that the United States in the end said, you know what, not only am I leaving Iraq, the same happened in Afghanistan, I'm actually going to forget about the Middle East and go to focus on Asia. So they basically did that. Now that whole strategy is no longer viable for a number of reasons, even before the current attack. Iranian population began to basically become angry with this strategy because the cost of the strategy was too high. They began saying, well, why are we the only country to be under these kinds of sanctions? Like, why can't we be like Turkey? Or why can't we be like China? They're not necessarily always, on good terms with America, but they're not under the situation we are. And they basically stopped buying into the logic of resistance, of why we're doing this. And then, we're not even Arab. Why are we on the forefront of the Palestinian issue? What business do we have in Lebanon? And if they say, well, Hezbollah is our defense, they would say, well, okay, why don't you just go make peace with Israel so you don't need this defense? But increasingly, they began to say, we don't support this anymore. And this began to become very manifest by 2016, I would say. And then when October 7th happened, and then the killing of Nasrallah, et cetera, happened, the strategy began to crumble, even purely on its what do you call it, the foundations of what was keeping it going. So Hezbollah broke down. Iran couldn't do anything about it. Israel started attacking Iran directly from the air. And they had no way of defending it. So this, I think Iran, regardless of Iran, that idea that Iran forever will resist the United States and sees itself in defiance of the United States is gone, or it cannot survive in this way. I'm not saying that some core ideas would not, but if you want to understand the mindset of Iran's current leaders right now, or Khamenei, and see what makes them tick, I think it's a mistake to think of them in terms of religion. It's a sort of a hardcore nationalism with a very particular, peculiar, if you want to call it, reading of what should be Iran's national interest and priorities.
Thank you for that. I'll move over. We have a couple more questions. One of them is, will Israel try to hit or use special forces in Fordo in 2 weeks? Thoughts about success chance without US help versus with US help on Fordo. That's the first question. And following up, Mega seems to be really against US entry into this conflict. What would a deal between US and Iran look like that is palatable to both sides? How will Israel react to progress in this direction?
So, I mean, on the question of Fordo, Israel has basically made the issue of destruction of Fordo as a must-have, right? And I'm not a nuclear expert to say whether that's actually absolutely necessary. I'm also not a military expert to say, can Israel do it without the US? But the way that Israel and those in Washington who are supporting US war, entering the war, are making this argument that destruction of Fordo is absolutely necessary, and Israel can't do it by itself, so United States must enter this war, right? So that's the argument of the neocons, that's the argument of those within the administration outside which are pushing for this idea, right? So you can only go back by this argument that Israel does not have the capability of either the size of the bomb that is required to destroy Fordo, or the airplane that would have to carry it in order to do it. So if the United States doesn't enter, then Israel would perhaps have to revise its definition of what is good enough damage to Iranian nuclear program, that it would basically lead to an end of the war. Now, for the United States, it also has put a maximal position on the table that Iran, well, it said Iran cannot have a bomb, which is Iran had said that's fine, we don't want a bomb. Now it says Iran cannot have enrichment, and Iran took this position that enrichment is our inherent right. Under the Non-Proliferation Treaty, which Iran is signatory to, Iran has a right to enrichment, definitely to 3%, 4% enrichment. And Iran took the position that if we agreed not to do that, basically we're taking we're agreeing to the status of a second-class country under NPT. That even Congo under NPT would have a right to enrich on paper. So whereas you're saying Iran should give up that right. And so it became a matter of nationalism for them. Now, there might be, creative ways to bridge the gap. That was supposedly what the nuclear deal was supposed to do, to find ways to do it. And then I have to say that enrichment is not the only thing that the world has to worry about Iran's nuclear program. Like, let's say that even if they gave up enrichment right now, according to Prime Minister of Israel, they have enough enriched material for 9 bombs. So you could basically say Fordo should not be the most important demand right now. That stockpile of enriched uranium that could make 9 bombs should be what you should be focused on, right? So yes, there is a diplomatic path, but I think diplomacy is very different from dictate. President Trump's approach to this so long has been, I want a deal without negotiating. I want to tell you what I want now, and I want you to say yes, and then maybe like a real estate deal, lawyers, diplomats will just cross the T's and dot the I's. Iranians actually expect to be negotiating in detail about, okay, what if we did this? What if we did it this way? What if we did it that way? And what in other words, that's what's necessary. So the president is still making demands that I want you to say, I mean, he actually put it very eloquently, unconditional surrender. I mean, you can't make it any more clear what he's asking. So is any regime in Iran, particularly this one, able to do unconditional surrender and survive? Would even the Iranian people accept unconditional surrender, right? What does unconditional surrender mean? And then if they said unconditional surrender on the nuclear issue, is he then going to say, no, I meant not only on nuclear, but I also want on politics, I also want on missiles, I want also on all of that. So, he also has to actually be serious about negotiations rather than issuing these demands on Truth Social or on Twitter, right? Because that's not really negotiations. Maybe some of that's happening back channel. I don't know. But yes, at some point, as I said, if Iran and the United States both have a serious interest of this war not going to the next phase, and Iran is hurting enough to say, no, I need a serious deal. And not only I need a deal to stop the nuclear program, I also need to have serious investment in the country because of the damage that the war has done. So I'm willing to give you something I wasn't willing to give you before, right? I don't want to say that's not possible. And then you have to have Israel on board because, as I said, it has to be a point at which all three see greater benefit in a negotiated settlement than continuation of the war. And that's a matter of what cost are they incurring and what are the risks to them of continuing the war. Now, a diplomatic negotiation and a diplomatic success is best possible where there's a Venn diagram convergence of these things. That where Israel is sitting, where Iran is sitting, and where the US is sitting, their view of the cost of the war, the benefit of a deal, somehow coalesces. Like on Ukraine, the president thought he had it. But the Russians don't see benefit in negotiations now, in serious negotiations now. And the president said it. I don't think they're ready to negotiate. And nor are the Ukrainians. The only country that seems to be ready for Ukraine-Russia negotiations is the US. Right? So it doesn't work. He can do whatever he wants in the Oval Office to Zelensky. And even if Zelensky said yes, Putin said no. Right? So do you have a similar kind of a dynamic here? Every war ultimately finishes, every war that doesn't end up with a complete conquest, like Iraq invading US invading Iraq. Every war has to end ultimately in a negotiated settlement. And I give you one example, which is a historical one, which is the 1973 war between the Israelis and the Arabs. Right? In 1967, Israel won in 5 days. But in 1973, at the beginning, the Arabs had the upper hand. They crossed Golan, they crossed Sinai. In the second week, the Israelis got the upper hand in the Golan, and it became a draw in the Sinai. And then it reached a point that both Egypt and Israel saw that this was the right time to agree to a ceasefire, which allowed US and the Soviet Union to help broker that. So we're not there yet. Maybe we will be in 2 weeks, but I don't think we're quite there yet.
Thank you for that. I want to be mindful with your time. I'll mention two more questions,
Sure.
and you can really choose, which one to take first. Do you think the longer-term implications for the NPT and global governance of nuclear weapons energy capacity will be? That's the first question. And the second one is, what will be the best case scenario for Iran as a consequence of this conflict?
So the first one, it's a very good question. I think we're now increasingly living in an international order that is becoming the law of the jungle. I mean, this started with the Gaza war. and it's now become more so. So I would refer to the former head of IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, which is the main UN instrument managing NPT, Mohammed al-Baradei, the Egyptian diplomat, who tweeted a few days ago that with this unprovoked Israeli attack on Iran, every country in the world is going to believe that the only way to protect themselves is by nuclear weapons, right? And therefore, this has done grave damage to NPT. I mean, partly it also has to do with the fact that Europeans, Americans, etc., basically have given a carte blanche to Israel. So Iran is an easy target here, right? Because its government has got really bad international reputation. It has supported terrorism. It has a bad record at home. It has a bad record abroad. Most of the region has had problems with it. But if you looked at this generically, you're dealing with Israel, which is a superior military machine. It has the full backing of the United States in terms of supplies, political, diplomatic, military support. And then it also has the support, diplomatic, moral, military support of Europe as well. And it also has shown that it's willing to take risks and a kind of actions to protect its own security in the way it sees it, but in a way that none of the rules and regulations of the international order actually applies to it, right? For instance, Israel yesterday attacked the Iraq nuclear facility in Iran. And according to the rules of the IAEA, the Iraq nuclear facility, because it's under the safeguards of IAEA, is protected by the, and according to the rules of UN, attacking it is a violation of international law. And the IAEA itself refuses to condemn that. So if you live in a circumstance where international rules are not a protection for you, and you don't have the military means to freely, then nuclear weapons become extremely attractive. And just to say about how this plays out, like in Turkey, the head of the Nationalist Party, MHP, said that after Iran, it will be Turkey's turn. Now, this might be hyperbole, but first of all, it tells you what might be in the head of a major politician. And then I would say, why not? I mean, if Israel can destroy Iran, then we might say to Turkey, you need to leave Syria right now, right? And why wouldn't it not do so? Yes, Turkey has a military capability, etc. But at some point, but the mindset is this: is that if you have the military the size of Turkey's and you're a member of NATO, then okay, you feel certain comfort. But if Turkish politicians are saying, we're worried about the example of Iran, then other countries are going to be far more worried. So yes, I do worry about, what lesson it sends. And, when the president of the United States just tweets, I expect total surrender, or I'm going to kill the supreme leader, I'm going to destroy the country. This is not the same international order that we're familiar with. I mean, I know a lot of people in the West are cheering this kind of, house cleaning. But you have to also think about what the consequences are, of when you broke the rules yourself, what the consequences are. And then on your second point, I mean, the best case scenario is that, Iran does not get completely destroyed in this war, but that enough of the Islamic Republic's strategy, thinking, etc., is broken down, or is now the threat to the countries at a level that they cannot be sort of confident and secure in the way they have thought for so many years, and it will force a moment of reckoning. with the population, but among them. And that the debates within the ruling elite that have been there for a long time between those who want to stay the course and those who want to change course will become intense enough. And those who want to stay the course are going to be weaker, and those who want to change course will become stronger, and that sort of a new political coalition takes over. I mean, I think the best case scenario is not regime change as we saw in Iraq and Afghanistan. Those things didn't end up happily. But it's a kind of regime transition like we saw when Soviet Union went from Soviet Union to Russia, or China went from Mao to Deng Xiaoping. And it's still the same Communist Party. But at one point, the groups that were saying that this model doesn't work anymore, we need to change, won the debate. And I'm hoping that this war will provide that moment.
I know we need to wrap up. If you have time for one more question, a very short answer.
Sure.
All right.
Sure.
I was going to ask you one more question from our participants. How will the U.S. participation in the Iran war affect the deals Trump made with the GCC countries?
Well, there's a saying that when Henry Kissinger was asked about Iran-Iraq war in the 1980s, he said, I hope they both lose. I mean, you would say that the GCC is not going to be happy with Iran winning, is not going to be happy with Israel winning. But I think because of the sort of the change that it will bring into the region, but I think the biggest fear they have is what it might do to their economies. I think it's not that they like Iran or have any love for its government, but I think they understand that a war with Iran will mean a war in the Persian Gulf. And the spectacular economic success of the region, its promise of trillions of dollars in economic growth with AI, chip making, trade, etc., needs peace. And war will bring instability and uncertainty. And everybody can give you, as we were talking earlier, the sort of the happy, simple scenario in which all the dominoes fall in the right way. But what if they don't? What if you're not dealing with 3 months of chaos? You're dealing with 3, 5, 7, 8 years of chaos. What if Iran will begin to look more like Yemen? What if a much more nationalistic, hardline government takes over in Tehran, right? What if the United States and Iran engage in a war of attrition again for a long period of time? What if Iran goes nuclear out of this conflict, protects enough of its so the actual violence in the short run worries them, but a scenario in which they will become South Korea and Iran will become North Korea is also not pleasant to them, right? It does impact their going forward. So they're not spectators here. They're not watching this from afar. They're actually looking at a crisis that they hope they can avert, and they don't know what the crisis would be, what the magnitude would be, and they are vulnerable to it.
With that, I think, Dr. Nasr, I want to thank you.
Thank you.
This was very insightful for, I think, everyone else who joined the call, including myself. I want to thank you for your time, for your remarks. And I know we didn't really manage to answer all the questions, but I want to promise, all our participants on the call, I'll make sure to get back to you with our insights in the meantime when we share the replay. Thank you. We would love to host you again, hopefully to, better
Absolutely. It would be my pleasure. And thank you again for hosting me. It was wonderful having this conversation.
Very much enjoyed it. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you
care.
so much,
Bye-bye.
everyone, for joining us. Any follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out to the Enquire team. Thank you.